My fiancé claimed he was working night shifts at the hospital for 6 months. I brought him dinner as a surprise, and the head nurse said he had quit months ago. An hour later, I found him playing dad in another family's living room. My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and 6 months ago, I thought my life was finally becoming the kind of stable, ordinary happiness people spend years trying to build. I had a solid career in commercial real estate. I had savings. I had an apartment that felt like mine in every way that mattered. There was a wedding planned for the following spring, a guest list half finished on my laptop, and a man I believed I knew well enough to marry. His name was Ethan Carter. Ethan was 29, easy to love in the way charming people often are. He remembered small things. He knew how I took my coffee, which restaurant I liked after a bad week, which songs made me quiet in the car. We'd been together 3 years and engaged for 8 months, and if anyone had asked me back then whether I trusted him, I wouldn't have even hesitated. That was probably the saddest part. I didn't suspect anything at first. 6 months earlier, Ethan told me the hospital needed extra overnight coverage. He worked as an ER nurse, so it sounded normal enough. Hospitals were always understaffed, and he said the night differential would help us save for the wedding. They're desperate right now, he told me one evening while we were eating takeout on the couch. It's only a few nights a week. I looked at him over the carton of noodles. A few nights? Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, maybe the occasional Monday. We'll barely see each other. I know. He reached for my hand. But it's temporary, and honestly, the money will help. That was the sentence that made me stop questioning it. The wedding had already started becoming more expensive than either of us expected, and I didn't want to be the kind of fiancé who complained when her partner was trying to help. So I supported him. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, Ethan left around 6 in the evening, wearing scrubs, and came home shortly after 7 the next morning, looking exhausted. Sometimes I would already be dressed for work when he walked in. We'd get maybe 20 minutes together while he drank coffee and told me some vague story about a chaotic shift before disappearing into the bedroom to sleep. I missed him, but I told myself this was what adulthood looked like sometimes. You sacrifice. You get through inconvenient seasons. You build the future first and enjoy it later. Looking back, the schedule was almost too perfect. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, every Saturday. The pattern never changed. Back then, I saw that as reliability. Now I realize he was simply following a routine he'd practiced for months. One Thursday, I decided to surprise him. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't trying to catch him. I wasn't suspicious. I just missed my fiancé and thought maybe bringing dinner to the hospital would give us half an hour together in the middle of all those night shifts. I picked up his favorite Thai food from the little place near our apartment and drove over around 9, imagining him looking tired but happy to see me. I can still remember how warm the food felt in my hand when I walked into the emergency department. The ER was busy. Nurses moved quickly between stations. Monitors beeped. A man in a wheelchair argued with someone near the intake desk. It all felt normal, which somehow makes the memory worse now. I walked up to the nurse's station and smiled. "Hi, I'm looking for Ethan Carter." The charge nurse looked up from her screen. Her expression didn't change into recognition. It changed into confusion. "I'm sorry?" "Ethan Carter," I said again. ER nurse. He's working tonight. She stared at me for a second, then shook her head slightly. "He doesn't work here." I gave a small nervous laugh because that was the only reaction my body could find. "No, he does. He should be on night shift." The nurse's face softened in a way that made my stomach tighten before she even spoke. "He resigned months ago?" The bag of food suddenly felt heavier. "What?" "He left in April, gave 2 weeks' notice, and said he was pursuing another opportunity." April. 6 months ago, right when the night shift started. I don't remember exactly what I said after that. I think I thanked her. I know I walked back to my car because the next clear memory I have is sitting in the hospital parking lot with the food, cooling on the passenger seat, and my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel. At first, my mind wouldn't let the obvious answer in. Maybe he transferred departments. Maybe there was another hospital. Maybe the nurse was mistaken. But she had looked certain, calm, almost sorry for me. I stayed in that parking lot for nearly 30 minutes, replaying the last 6 months. The tired smiles, the invented patience, the nights he came home smelling faintly of coffee and cologne instead of antiseptic, the way I had kissed him goodbye and told him to be safe. Then I remembered the phone plan. We were on a family account, my account. I paid the bill, and there was a location feature I'd never used before because I'd never had a reason to, until that night. I logged in from the parking lot. A few minutes later, an address appeared on the screen. Not the hospital. Not another hospital. Not a clinic. A house across town. I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for my brain to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Then I started the car. The drive took about 20 minutes. I barely remember the streets. I remember the neighborhood, though. Quiet, suburban, full of 2-story houses with trimmed lawns, basketball hoops, minivans, bicycles left near driveways. The kind of place where families lived. The address led me to a warm-looking house with lights glowing through the front windows. Ethan's SUV was in the driveway. I parked half a block away and just stared at the house for a moment, unable to make myself get out of the car. At first, nothing happened. Then I saw movement through the front window. Ethan, not alone. A woman stood beside him in the kitchen. She was a brunette, probably around his age, wearing the kind of comfortable clothes people wear at home when they aren't expecting strangers. A few seconds later, two children ran through the room. One looked about 6, the other maybe 9. Ethan laughed at something one of them said. The woman smiled. Then all 4 of them gathered around the kitchen table. The 4 of them looked exactly like a family finishing dinner together. I don't know how long I sat there before I fully understood that what I was watching wasn't a random visit. He knew where things were in that kitchen. He helped clear the table without asking. One of the kids handed him something, and he crouched down to look at it with the kind of easy patience that doesn't come from 1 or 2 visits. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. An affair would have been terrible. A hotel room, secret texts, stolen hours. All of that would have broken me. But this was different. This had routines. This had homework at the table. This had children comfortable enough to climb onto the couch beside him. Around 8:30, the younger child curled up next to Ethan, and he put his arm around the kid like it was the most natural thing in the world. No hesitation, no awkwardness, no sense that he was a guest. Whatever excuse I had been trying to build in my head collapsed right there. By 9:30, the children had gone upstairs. The woman and Ethan stayed downstairs on the couch, sitting close enough that even from my car I could understand the shape of it. They talked. She leaned into him. He rested his arm behind her shoulders. I thought about our wedding invitations, sitting on the dining table at home. I thought about the venue deposit, the seating chart, the honeymoon tabs saved on my browser. I thought about all the times I had told myself we were tired because we were building something together. A little after 11, Ethan stood. The woman walked him to the front door. I leaned forward without meaning to. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed him. Not quickly, not politely, not in a way anyone could explain away. It was familiar, comfortable, the kind of kiss people give when they believe they belong to each other. When they separated, he touched her face before walking to his SUV. I waited until he pulled away, then started my car and followed at a distance. Part of me still expected him to turn toward a hospital. I don't know why. Maybe some desperate piece of me wanted one impossible explanation to appear at the last second. He drove straight back to our apartment complex. I parked where he wouldn't see me and watched him get out. He opened the back of his SUV, pulled out a set of wrinkled scrubs, and changed right there inside the vehicle. Then he messed up his hair, grabbed a coffee cup from the center console, and walked toward our building. That was the detail that made me feel sick. Not the kiss, not even the house. The costume change, the preparation, the effort he put into coming home looking like the man I thought he was. By the time I got upstairs, Ethan was already in the kitchen. He looked up and smiled. Hey, babe! I stood near the door, staring at the face I'd trusted for 3 years. Rough night, he said, rubbing one hand over his eyes. You okay? I asked, though I already knew nothing about him was okay. Yeah, we had a trauma come in around midnight. Total chaos. He sighed and leaned against the counter. I'm wiped. The lie came so easily that for a moment I felt almost dizzy. I wondered how many times he'd done this, how many stories he'd invented, how many mornings I had stood there listening like a fool while he replayed a shift that never happened. You should sleep, I said. He walked over and kissed my forehead. The same soft, automatic gesture he had probably used on her less than an hour earlier. Then he went into the bedroom and fell asleep within minutes. I didn't sleep at all. I stayed up until sunrise searching public records and property details. The house belonged to the woman. Her name was Hannah. Public records showed a divorce finalized 2 years earlier and 2 children from that marriage. No husband, no remarriage. No obvious reason Ethan should have been there 3 nights a week wearing the face of a man coming home to his family. The more I found, the less room there was for denial. Those children weren't visiting him. He was visiting them. Regularly. For months. Maybe longer. And that made the betrayal uglier than I had been prepared for. Adults lie to each other all the time, but children don't know they're standing inside somebody else's deception. They just see who shows up, who helps with homework, who sits on the couch, who says goodnight. Around 6 in the morning, I heard Ethan moving in the bedroom, so I closed the tabs and tried to make my face look normal. He came out sleepy, poured coffee, and smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong. We should probably finish the seating chart this weekend, he said. I nearly choked on the air. The seating chart? For the wedding. He gave me a confused look. You said your aunt needed to know if she could bring someone. Right, I said, this weekend. Then he started talking about flowers and hotel blocks while I stood there thinking about another kitchen, another woman, another set of children who probably thought he was part of their lives. When he finally left the apartment, something inside me went completely still. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call him and demand answers. I packed. Passport, financial records, laptop, work files, a few clothes, the things I'd need if I never came back. By late afternoon, my suitcase was beside the door, but I couldn't leave without doing one thing. Hannah deserved to know. Maybe she knew about me and didn't care. Maybe she didn't. Either way, I wasn't going to let Ethan keep deciding what truth each of us got to live in. I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a short note. No insults, no threats, just facts. Ethan Carter is engaged to me. We live together. Our wedding is planned for next spring. He told me he was working night shifts at the hospital, but I found out he quit 6 months ago. I don't know what he told you, but I think you should know the truth. I signed my name and added my number at the bottom. That evening, I drove back to Hannah's neighborhood. I parked around the corner and waited until I saw her leave with the children. Then I walked to the mailbox, slipped the envelope inside, and left. No confrontation. No scene. Just the first honest thing anyone had done in 6 months. After that, I drove straight to my older sister Rachel's house across town. Rachel opened the door, looked at my suitcase, then looked at my face. What happened? I tried to answer, but nothing came out. So I said the only thing I could manage. I need somewhere to stay for a few days. She didn't ask for details. She just opened the door wider. I turned off my phone that night and disappeared from Ethan's reach. No calls, no messages, no explanations, no chance for him to perform another version of himself before I was ready to hear it. The first few days at Rachel's house were quiet in the worst way. I didn't cry as much as I expected. Mostly, I replayed memories and tried to figure out where the lies began. Our engagement trip. The night we chose the venue. The morning he told me he loved how safe our life felt. Every memory felt contaminated, like I had to hold it up to the light and check for cracks. Rachel didn't push. She made coffee. She sat with me on the patio. She let me be silent until one afternoon when she said, "You don't have to tell me everything, but somebody hurt you." I looked down at the mug in my hands. "Ethan," her jaw tightened. "How bad?" I watched steam rise from the coffee. "Worse than cheating." She reached over and squeezed my hand, and for once I didn't have to explain anything. On the 7th day, I turned my phone back on. The screen flooded so fast it froze. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, emails, social media messages. 193 texts, 78 missed calls, dozens of voicemails. Most were from Ethan, some were from his mother, a few were from mutual friends, and one came from a number I didn't recognize. The message said, "We need to talk, this is Hannah." So she had found the note. I reread Hannah's message twice before setting the phone down. Whatever happened after she read it had clearly blown through both of Ethan's lives at once. I opened Ethan's messages next. At first, he sounded worried. "Where are you? Are you okay? Please answer me." Then came panic. "Olivia, this isn't funny. I'm really worried. Please tell me you're safe." Then confusion. "Why would you contact her? What did you do?" And finally anger. "You had no right. You embarrassed me. Do you have any idea what you've done?" That one made me stare at the screen for a long time. Apparently, the problem wasn't the 6 months of lies. The problem was that I'd exposed them. Not the 6 months of fake shifts, not the woman, not the children, not the wedding he kept planning with me while building a second home somewhere else. A few messages later, the tone changed again. "Please let me explain. I love you. You're overreacting. Just call me." Near the bottom was the newest message. "If you don't contact me tomorrow, I'm filing a missing persons report." That finally deserved a response. I typed, "I'm not missing. We're done. I'll arrange to collect the rest of my things." I hit send. The phone rang immediately. "Ethan." I declined. It rang again. Declined. Again. Declined. After enough calls that my hands started shaking from the sound alone, the messages resumed. "Please answer. 5 minutes. This isn't what it looks like." I typed back. "Then tell me what it looks like." The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, helping someone. I read the message again. 6 months of fake shifts. Another woman. 2 children. Thousands of dollars spent behind my back. And somehow he'd reduced all of it to 3 words. Helping someone. After 6 months of lies, fake shifts, a secret relationship, and children who thought he belonged in their house, his explanation was that he had been helping someone. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, his mother called. I almost ignored it, but part of me wanted to know what story he'd given her. "Olivia, thank God," she said when I answered. "My son is devastated." I leaned back in Rachel's kitchen chair. "Did he tell you he quit his hospital job 6 months ago?" Silence. "Did he tell you he's been spending his so-called night shifts at another woman's house?" Still silence. "Did he tell you he was playing stepfather to her children while planning a wedding with me?" Her voice dropped. "He said it was complicated." I rubbed a hand over my forehead. "Complicated is arguing over wedding flowers. This is deception." "He says he loves you." He had a strange way of showing it. She tried a few more soft defenses. He was confused. He cared too much. He didn't know how to tell me. None of it mattered. By the time I hung up, Rachel was watching me from across the room. "That bad?" "Worse," I said. The next morning, I went back to the apartment while Ethan was gone. Walking inside felt like entering someone else's life. The couch was still there. The wedding magazines were still on the table. A note he'd written me weeks earlier was still stuck to the fridge. Don't forget dinner with Mom Friday. Love you. I took the rest of my things slowly. No dramatic packing, no tears, just one drawer, one shelf, one room at a time. Before I left, I slid the engagement ring off my finger. Ethan had put it there 8 months earlier, promising forever with a face so sincere I would have trusted it with anything. I placed the ring back in its box and left it on the kitchen counter beside my keys. From the parking lot, I sent one final message. I got my things. The ring and keys are inside. Don't contact me again. His reply started almost immediately. Olivia, please. I blocked him before the rest arrived. I thought that would give me at least a little peace. It didn't. That afternoon, I opened our shared credit card statements and started scrolling. At first, I expected a few restaurants or maybe some gifts. Something careless, something humiliating, but contained. Then I saw the pattern. Grocery stores near Hannah's neighborhood, children's clothing stores, toy stores, family restaurants, ice cream shops, a photography studio. I stopped at that one, a family photography session. I checked the dates again and sorted the charges. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. The same nights Ethan was supposedly at the hospital. While I thought he was working overtime to help pay for our wedding, he was buying groceries for another household and paying for memories with a family he never told me existed. The total came to a little over $4,700. I stood in Rachel's dining room staring at the laptop screen open in front of me and felt something colder than heartbreak settle in. This wasn't only emotional betrayal anymore. He had used our money to finance the lie. The next morning, I called the credit card company. Since Ethan had authorized access, recovering past charges would be difficult, but they removed him immediately and closed the account to future charges. The account was closed, and for a moment I felt relieved. It didn't last long. A little later, Rachel walked into the kitchen holding her phone. You should see this. A mutual friend had sent screenshots. Ethan was talking. Not publicly, not yet. Through friends, through family, quietly, carefully. According to him, I had disappeared without explanation. I had abandoned him. I had changed. I had become irrational and cold. Nobody understood why I had done this to him. I handed the phone back to Rachel and stared at the table. He really thinks he can turn this around. Rachel's mouth tightened. Can he? I looked at the growing folder of screenshots, credit card statements, phone records, and photos on my laptop. Not if people ask the right questions. But people don't always ask the right questions. Some of them just choose the easier story. And Ethan had always been very good at making his version sound easier. For a little while it worked. Far more people believed him than I expected. That's one of the most frustrating things about situations like this. The truth usually requires context, timelines, evidence, and uncomfortable conversations. A lie only needs to sound believable for 30 seconds. And Ethan had always been good at sounding believable. For a few days, I ignored most of it. I had bigger things to worry about than whatever story he was feeding mutual friends. I was still trying to understand the financial mess he'd left behind. The more time I spent at reviewing the statements, the less those charges looked random. It wasn't really about the money anymore. It was what the purchases represented. School supplies, family meals, small everyday expenses. The kind of things people buy when they're part of someone's daily life. Every receipt pointed to the same conclusion. Ethan hadn't been visiting that house once in a while. He'd made himself part of it. The more I looked, the more obvious it became that he hadn't simply been seeing another woman. He'd been building routines there, traditions, expectations. That realization bothered me more than I expected. Hannah wasn't what bothered me most. It was the kids. I kept remembering the younger child climbing onto the couch beside him without hesitation, the way Ethan had wrapped an arm around him automatically. That wasn't the behavior of someone who dropped by occasionally. That was familiarity. And familiarity takes time. A few days later, Hannah finally called. I answered on the third ring. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. You were right. There wasn't any anger in her voice, no accusation, just exhaustion. The kind that comes after you've spent days pulling apart a reality you thought you understood. I'm sorry, I said quietly. So am I. We sat in silence for a second. Then she asked, how long were you together? 3 years. Another pause. He told me he'd been single for almost a year. I closed my eyes. There it was. The version he'd given her. Not separated. Not engaged. Not living with someone. Single. Completely available. Hannah let out a slow breath. When I confronted him, the story changed 3 times in 20 minutes. That didn't surprise me. What did he say? At first he claimed you were an ex. I shook my head. Then? Then he said you two were separated but still living together because of the apartment. I almost smiled at how predictable it sounded. And after that? He said the wedding wasn't really happening. I leaned back in my chair. Of course. Every version moved a little closer to the truth because he knew evidence existed. He wasn't being honest. He was simply changing the story whenever the previous one stopped working. For nearly an hour, we compared timelines. Trips, dates, weekends, stories he'd told each of us. By the end, a clear pattern emerged. Whenever he was with me, he was supposedly working. Whenever he was with Hannah, he was supposedly recovering from a difficult relationship. The two stories fit together like puzzle pieces. A disgusting, carefully managed puzzle. Before hanging up, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since the night outside her house. Did the kids know about me? No. The answer came immediately. They didn't know anything. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That's probably for the best. Her voice softened. They miss him. I didn't know what to say. Neither did she. Some situations don't leave much room for words. After the call ended, I stayed in the kitchen for several minutes, unable to focus on anything else. Rachel eventually walked into the kitchen. How'd it go? Hannah didn't know. Rachel frowned. None of it? I shook my head. None of it. She sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Neither of us needed to say what we were both thinking, because there wasn't really anything left to add. A few days later, another problem surfaced. The apartment. Technically, the lease had always been in my name. I'd signed it before Ethan moved in, and although he'd contributed financially, he was never added to the paperwork. At the time, it seemed insignificant. One more item on a long list of things we'd planned to sort out after the wedding. Now it mattered. A lot. I contacted the landlord and explained the situation. Not every detail. Just enough. The engagement was over. The relationship was over. I needed to know my options. The landlord reviewed everything and gave a straightforward answer. Legally, Ethan couldn't claim the apartment. There would still be procedures, notice periods, paperwork, formalities. But the situation itself wasn't complicated. I finally felt my shoulders relax a little. Not happiness, just certainty. After months of living inside somebody else's lies, certainty felt surprisingly valuable. Unfortunately, Ethan didn't share that feeling. The calls started again shortly after he received notice. Not directly. He knew I had his number blocked. Instead, they came from friends, family members, numbers I'd never seen before. Some messages were apologetic, others were angry. A few were genuinely unbelievable. One voicemail accused me of abandoning Ethan during a difficult emotional period. Another suggested I was punishing him for being compassionate. The word compassionate almost made me put my phone down. Apparently, spending 6 months lying to your fiancé while secretly playing house somewhere else now qualified as compassion. Rachel listened to one of the messages while making coffee. When it ended, she stared at the phone. Do people actually hear themselves? Apparently not. Ethan wasn't the surprising part. By then, I understood exactly who he was. What surprised me was how many people preferred a simple lie over a complicated truth. His version required almost no thought. Mine required evidence, and evidence takes effort. Still, some people did ask questions. Those were the conversations that mattered. A close friend called one evening and said, "Something about this doesn't make sense." So I showed her the timeline, the hospital resignation, the location history, the financial records, the messages. When she finished looking through everything, she sat back in silence. Then she said the same thing almost everyone eventually said. Oh, just one word. But it was the sound people made when the story Ethan was selling finally collided with reality. The lawyer came next, not because I wanted revenge, and not because I was dreaming about some dramatic courtroom showdown. I simply needed to know where I stood financially. By then, the folder on my laptop had grown considerably. Bank statements, credit card records, screenshots, phone logs, photographs, receipts. I brought everything. The attorney spent nearly an hour reviewing it. When she finally looked up, she wasn't shocked. She looked irritated, not at me, at the situation. "You're focused on the affair," she said. "I guess." "You shouldn't be." That caught my attention. She tapped several documents. "Focus on the money." I looked down at the paperwork. The money? Unauthorized spending, shared funds, property disputes, missing assets. That's where your strongest claims are. I stared at the folder. For weeks, I'd been treating the financial side as a painful detail attached to the betrayal. The attorney saw it differently. To her, the emotional damage and the financial damage were separate things. One couldn't be fixed. The other could. Before I left, she gave me simple advice. Document everything. Save every message. Keep every receipt. Don't argue. Don't threaten. Don't negotiate emotionally. Let evidence speak for itself. At the time, it sounded boring. Later, it would become the best advice anyone gave me. Because Ethan was about to make things much worse for himself. And he didn't even realize it yet. For a little while, things were quiet. Quiet enough that I started hoping the worst was finally behind me. I should have known better. A few days after meeting with the attorney, I got a call from my landlord while I was sitting at work. He's gone. For a second, I just stared at the phone. Gone? He moved out. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For weeks, it had felt like my entire life was stuck in place. Every conversation, every decision, every piece of paperwork seemed connected to Ethan somehow. Hearing he was finally out of the apartment felt like the first real step forward. Then the landlord added, "You should probably come see the place." My stomach dropped immediately. An hour later, I understood why he'd called. The apartment wasn't destroyed. Honestly, part of me almost wished it had been. Destruction would have at least been straightforward. What Ethan left behind felt more deliberate than that. The television was gone. The coffee machine my parents had bought me for my birthday was gone. Several kitchen appliances had disappeared. Decorations were missing. A side table was gone. 2 lamps were gone. Even a few things I knew I'd personally purchased had somehow found their way into his moving truck. Then there was the mess. Dirty dishes, rotting food, garbage, spilled liquids. The smell hit me before I even finished opening the door. Rachel stood beside me in the living room, staring at the disaster. After a minute, she shook her head. He's almost 30, apparently. No, seriously, he's almost 30. I knew exactly what she meant. Because this didn't look like somebody heartbroken. It looked like somebody throwing a tantrum. I walked through the apartment slowly, taking photographs of everything. Every missing item, every damaged area, every unpaid utility notice sitting on the counter. By the time I left, my evidence folder had grown even larger. A week later, the wedding vendors started calling. At first, I assumed they were reaching out because of cancellations. I was wrong. The venue manager sounded uncomfortable. There's something we thought you should know. My stomach immediately tightened. What happened? Your fiancé contacted us. Former fiancé. But I didn't bother correcting her. What did he want? The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to worry me. He asked whether the deposit could be transferred to a future event. I blinked. A future event? Yes. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. The wedding had collapsed because of him. The relationship was over. Yet he was apparently calling vendors to see whether deposits could be preserved. For what exactly? His next engagement? A replacement wedding? I had no idea. The venue wasn't the only call. The photographer reached out, then the caterer, then the florist. Each conversation revealed some new attempt by Ethan to salvage money from an event he had personally destroyed. By then, nothing surprised me anymore. What surprised me was how exhausting it all felt. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of cleaning up problems I didn't create. Tired of finding new pieces of a mess that should have ended weeks earlier. One night, while reviewing documents at Rachel's kitchen table, I finally reached a decision. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just practical. I instructed my attorney to move forward. The claims weren't about the affair. The court couldn't fix that. The claims focused on the things that could actually be documented. The missing property. The financial losses. The unpaid obligations. The shared funds he'd spent without my knowledge. Nothing more. Nothing less. A few weeks later, a court date was scheduled. The moment Ethan was served, the phone calls started again, including one from his mother. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me. How dare you take my son to court? No greeting. No small talk. Straight to the accusation. I sat back in my chair. Hi to you too. This has gone far enough. I rubbed my forehead. No, it hasn't. He's already suffered enough. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Not what he'd done. Not who he'd hurt. Not the lies. Not the money. Only what had happened to him. I stayed calm. He lied to me for 6 months. Silence. He lied to Hannah. More silence. He spent shared money on another household. Nothing. He removed property from the apartment. Still nothing. Finally, she said, people make mistakes. I looked out Rachel's kitchen window. Maybe 6 months earlier, that argument would have worked on me. Maybe I would have softened. Maybe I would have started questioning myself. Not anymore. Mistakes happen once. The words came out quietly. This happened every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for 6 months. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Neither of us changed the other's mind. At that point, it didn't matter. The court date arrived 3 weeks later. I barely slept the night before. Not because I thought I would lose. I just wanted it finished. I wanted one day where everything got put on the table. One day where facts mattered more than stories. Then I wanted to move on with my life. The courthouse wasn't dramatic. No television cameras. No giant emotional confrontation. No surprise witnesses. Just a building full of people dealing with consequences. My attorney met me outside carrying a thick binder. Every document was organized. Every receipt. Every screenshot. Every statement. Months of lies reduced to paperwork. Inside, Ethan was already waiting. He looked different. Not physically exactly. Just worn down. The confidence that used to follow him everywhere seemed gone. He looked tired. Older. Like somebody who hadn't slept properly in a long time. For a second, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the hospital parking lot. The house. The children. The fake shifts. The money. The feeling passed. The hearing itself was surprisingly simple. The judge reviewed records. Asked questions. Listened. My attorney presented timelines and financial statements. Credit card records. Property receipts. Photographs. Account information. Nothing dramatic. Just evidence. Ethan tried to explain himself. He said he was helping a family. He said things became complicated. He said his intentions were good. The problem was that intentions don't erase documentation. Every answer led to another question. Every question led back to the same facts. Eventually, there wasn't much left to argue about. The judge ruled in my favor on the financial claims that could be proven. Not everything. Courts rarely work that way. But enough. Enough to establish responsibility. Enough to require repayment. Enough to close the door. When the hearing ended, people started filing out. My attorney packed away documents. I thought that was the end. Then I heard Ethan behind me. "You happy now?" I turned around. There wasn't much anger left in his voice, mostly bitterness. The bitterness of someone realizing consequences aren't negotiable. "You got what you wanted." I looked at him for a moment. "No." His expression shifted. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't what I wanted." Because it was true. I never wanted court. I never wanted lawyers. I never wanted evidence folders. I never wanted any of this. What I'd wanted was a normal future with someone I trusted. The future he'd thrown away. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he shook his head. "I have nothing now." The words hung there between us. No apartment. No wedding. No relationship with me. No relationship with Hannah. No second household waiting for him. Nothing that resembled the life he'd been trying to maintain. I expected to walk out of that courthouse feeling relieved. Maybe satisfied. Maybe angry. Instead, I just felt tired. Like I'd finally reached the end of something that had been draining me for months. A few months earlier, hearing him say he had nothing left probably would have broken me. Now it just sounded sad. Security eventually approached and encouraged everyone to clear the hallway. My attorney touched my arm. "Ready?" I nodded. And this time when I walked away, I didn't look back. A few weeks later, one last surprise surfaced. The jeweler who had created my engagement ring contacted me. Apparently, Ethan had attempted to sell it. The same ring I'd left behind on the kitchen counter. Because it had been custom designed, questions were asked before the sale could proceed. Ownership records were reviewed. The transaction stopped. When I heard the story, I just sat there shaking my head. Even at the very end, he was still creating new problems. Eventually, I sold the ring myself. Not because I needed the money, because I didn't want the reminder. The money went into savings. The memory stayed where it belonged, in the past. Life slowly settled after that. The apartment was cleaned. The missing furniture was replaced. Work became easier to focus on. A promotion I'd been chasing for months finally came through. Friends stopped asking questions. The phone stopped ringing. Most importantly, my life stopped revolving around damage control. One evening, months later, I was sitting alone in my apartment when I realized something. I hadn't thought about Ethan all day. Not once. No anger. No curiosity. No replaying old conversations. Nothing. Just an ordinary day. And after everything that happened, ordinary felt incredible. The last loose end arrived through email. The wedding venue contacted me, asking whether I wanted to transfer part of the deposit to a future event. I reread the email twice before replying, then declined. Instead, I requested that my remaining portion be donated to a charity supporting children dealing with family instability. A few weeks later, they sent confirmation. That felt right. More right than anything connected to that wedding ever had. As for Ethan, I haven't heard from him in a long time. I don't know where he lives. I don't know what he's doing. And honestly, I don't need to know. These days, I don't think about Ethan very often. Sometimes I remember him when I drive past the hospital. Sometimes I remember the wedding that never happened. But most days, I don't think about him at all. And honestly, after everything that happened, that's probably the best ending I could have asked for.